Hey, welcome into the REVO Church podcast. I'm Jamie. I'm the host, and it's been a minute since we've been here. We had a whole month of Proverbs, and here's the deal. If you didn't know that we did Proverbs, well, go check out our YouTube channel. You'll see it. There's 31 episodes of Proverbs, because guess what? There's 31 chapters in Proverbs. So it's a study that you can jump in. You can do that. You can read it. If you've never studied the book, it's a great time. But today I'm joined by co-host Matthew.
Ooh, co-host. I got elevated. No longer guest. I'm elevated.
Guest.
I love
He's
that.
He's a co-host. Let me tell you, I'm excited to have Matthew on, because you know what? When I think about a guy that's going to dive into the Bible, he's the second name I think of.
Who's first? Jamie Spry?
Jamie Spry. No, I'm so excited because we're going to be diving in this entire month, 2-month period. We're going to be diving into some tough questions of the Bible. We're going to be diving into some hard passages or tough questions, how you deal with different things. And so maybe you've never thought about these questions. That's okay. We're helping you think through them. Or maybe it's something that you've been struggling with, that you've been striving to do, and you're like, I don't know how to do it. Well, we said we want to come alongside you and help you. So each week on Tuesday, we're going to be dropping a video talking all about different passages that are tough, talking about different segments of how you can handle different things. So I'm excited for it. But Matthew, why don't you explain what we're going to be talking about today?
Ooh, all right. I guess I will. Today's an easy one, as they will all be. Nice and easy and fun to talk about.
Yeah, not difficult.
They'll all be fun to talk about, but
Yeah.
none of them will be easy. I was only half lying about that. This one is about confronting sin. So I'm excited about this one because it's a great thing for Christians to know how to do.
Yep.
Because not only are we commanded to do it, but it is also something that is good for us to do.
Yep.
And it's something that we're going to get faced with,
Yes.
whether it's that sounds really formal. You know, I was thinking about that. Confronting sin is like this big, ominous issue.
It makes me think like courtroom setting. Like I'm bringing somebody in and it's like,
I'm gonna call in some witnesses, and you know, like one of those great court movies where you get to watch the lawyers battle it out, and
someone stands up and points accused.
Yeah, and they're yelling at people, and you know, a few good men, that type courtroom scene, and gets all heated, and somebody confesses to murder, and you know, but it's not.
People are sweating and terrified.
Yeah. Well, now we might be sweating in here because of these lights, but who knows? It's not really like that. It's more of a thinking about what's good for the person that I love and that I care about, and we do that all the time. So we may not. I know confronting sin sounds like this big, scary thing, but it's really not always that. It's not always like, oh, I see someone and I've got to call them out and confront them. It's more of like, this person's hurting themselves. They're doing something that's harmful for them. I see this, you know, as being like a cliff they're about to fall off, and I want to stop them. It's more of a loving thing than like a confrontational, hating thing. So that's kind of, I guess, a general gist of what we're going to talk about, is how to talk to someone when they're struggling with sin, and how to kind of approach someone with that issue.
Yeah, and I think I want to lay the groundwork right away. When we're talking about sin, I just want to give a definition of sin.
Yeah.
So in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, there's many different Hebrew and Greek words that are translated into sin. But the most common Hebrew word and the most common Greek word, so it's over 80%.
I didn't come this prepared. All right. I came with an English Bible. He came with his Greek lexicon.
Nothing but the best. The most common translation in both. So it's over 80% in the Old Testament and over 75%, I believe, in the New Testament. Both translate to the phrase missing the mark. So we use it in our English Bible of just sin. If you see the word sin, the Greek word is typically hamartias. I don't want to mispronounce it.
He's even going to that too. But my goodness.
When it talks about the idea of missing the mark. And so when we hear that phrase missing the mark, what it's literally referring to is sin is anything that is missing the mark of what Jesus is calling us to do. And it has this idea of, it's a positive way of not just that we are missing the mark that God is calling us to, but that we are actively hitting the wrong mark. So when we sin, not only are we positively hitting the wrong mark, but we're missing what Jesus is calling us to. Yeah. And so when you get verses like in 1 Peter where he tells us, hey, be holy as I am holy. If you are not holy set apart, then you have missed the mark and you have sinned. And so therefore you actively missed what God called you. and also actively hit the wrong mark.
Right.
And so anytime we're talking about sin, if you have the question, is this sinful? Typically, if you're asking the question, is it wrong? You already know
there's
the answer.
There's a good chance.
You probably already know the answer.
Yep.
But so when we're talking about sin, that's the general definition that we're saying is, hey, it's missing the mark. So whatever God is calling you to, you miss the mark.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the what, right? That's what sin is. But the why question is important too.
Yep.
Not why do we sin, but why should we want to talk to somebody about it? You know?
Why is it important? If you're doing something that's only affecting you, why should I worry about it?
I mean, that's what a lot of times people think is, well, this sin is a secret thing. It's, just me in my room. It's me in my office. It's me. Nobody else knows about it while I'm in my car, something like that. And so it can be one of those things where it's like, well, why should, it be Jamie's problem what Matthew's doing in secret or vice versa? And I think what you were even saying helps us answer that question when you talk about what sin is, because if all of God's commands, which this is true about the Bible, all of God's commands are just revealing who he is, they're a part of his perfect character. And so therefore, all of his commands are good for us because they're making us into a more perfect image or reflection of who God is. And it's helping us become like him in that sense, and take on those perfect natures, those perfect attributes of God. And so then sin is when it's missing the mark of what God has commanded us to do, whether it's something like you said, active, and for a fact, like I should not do this and I'm doing it anyways, or the opposite of that is I should do it and I'm not doing it, or you don't know it's a sin necessarily and you're still doing it. It's not I do know this is wrong, but I'm going to do it anyway. Sometimes we do things that are wrong and we don't even know it.
We try to justify it or
that too.
Or say, it's not that bad.
Right. Right.
There's other people that are worse.
Yeah, but I mean, all those things are just us taking a good command from God, something that is meant to bless us and be good for us, and then saying, actually, I don't want that. I think I know better. I think about Jesus in the book of John when he says that he has come to give his people life and life to the fullest, or abundant life is sometimes translated like that. And the point is, when you're not living the way that Jesus tells us to, or the way that the Bible instructs, we're missing out on an abundant life. And so why should we want to confront sin? Well, there's lots of reasons, but one of the big ones is that the person that you love and care about, the person you see in that sin, is missing out on the full life and the abundant life that Jesus offers us by breaking the commandments that he gives us. And so it's not necessarily Jamie's wrong, Matthew's right, and I want to make sure Jamie knows that I'm right.
I want him to know.
Right, and it's not that. It's usually, and it should be, the motivation should be love for the other person, so that you go, I see that you're missing out on something. I'm not perfect either, but I've experienced what it's like to walk in the fullness of life in that area. And you're, to use your language, the language of the Greek and the Hebrew word, you're missing that mark and missing out on the abundant life God has for us. So I think that's one of the big reasons why we should confront sin. There's lots of others. Like we said, it's a command. So it's an obedience thing.
I think another reason is there's passages that talk about, it's better for someone to put the anvil around their neck and jump in a lake than it is to call someone to sin.
Right.
And so one reason we should be confronting or calling out sin or helping a believer turn from their sin is just simply saying, I don't want your sin to lead to other people falling. And so it's, just another reason of we look at sin and we're like, well, it's not, it's Matthew's sin or it's Matthew's struggle or it's Jamie's struggle. It's not affecting others. And, the Bible's pretty clear of you should be calling it out in love of, hey, you're missing out on what God is trying to do for you.
Right.
But then also, the idea of you don't want this to pull other people away. And so to set the groundwork of sin, sin is missing the mark of what God's calling us to. Why should we want to call out sin? Hey, we should love the people and want them to move forward. And we should also, look at it in a danger of we don't want people to be pulling others away. But when we're getting into the idea of calling out sin and talking about sin, there's a whole thing right now in the world of don't judge me.
Mm-hmm. Only God can judge.
Only God can judge me. And
God is my judge.
God is my judge.
That kind of stuff. Yeah.
And honestly, they're not wrong entirely.
Right.
God
and that's usually
that's usually what happens.
Is
they're not wrong, But I'd love if you could. There's a section in the Bible that actually talks about that. I'd love if you could read that for us. Where it talks where it talks about judging.
There's a lot, but one of the most common that comes from the whole judge not thing is because of what Matthew 7 verse 1 says. It literally, Jesus starts out saying, "Judge not, that you not be judged."
It's
For
powerful.
with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. And then in verse 3, he starts, it's probably one of the more well-known, at least by non-Christians, verses in the Bible, because it's a metaphor that gets used in culture all the time, that even Christians will use or non-Christians will use. He says, "Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when there is the log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." It's like, man, that's strong language. And it's something, like we said, that it's very well known, the whole idea of, well, hey, you've got a little something there when you've got like a whole stick protruding out of your eye. People use that all the time to talk about judging.
It's the idea of like, why would you talk about my sin? Like, I know what you do. Right. I know what you did on the weekend. Yeah, I'm doing this, but like, you did that. Mm-hmm. You can't talk to me. And so how can we as Christians, because we know that sin is missing the mark. We know that sin is what we are actively called to fight. Mm-hmm. We are told that all throughout Scripture of sin equals death. Romans 3:23, the wages of sin is death, right? Or for all have sinned. And then 6:23, the wages of sin is death. Death and sin, it separates us from God. It's missing the mark of what God is and what we're called to do. But then we get a verse that says, "Judge not, or else you be judged." And then Jesus almost doubles down and is saying, why are you looking at the problem in their life when you got a whole massive 2x4 sticking out of your eye?
Right.
So how can we justify those?
Yeah, I mean, it's right back to back. So it's obviously not like a contradiction. Yeah. And I mean, Jesus said one thing in one sentence, and then the very next sentence said something else. Yeah. And so it's obviously not that it's like, oh, well, I don't know how we reconcile this. Well, Jesus apparently thought it was reconcilable because he said it right back to back, right? And I think one of the big differences here between the idea of like judgment and then the idea on the opposite end of the spectrum, which would be discernment and confronting people about their sin in a right way, is to see that in these verses, he doesn't say, don't help your brother get the speck out of his eye. He says, get the log out of your eye first. And that to me has been really helpful to see. Like it's in verse 5 specifically. He says, you hypocrite, right? So I mean, there's that strong language. But then he says, first, take the log out of your own eye. Then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. So he's not saying don't help your brother take the speck out of his eye. He just says check your heart, check your life first. Make sure that you're in that area especially, but it could be other areas too. Make sure your life is in check, because the whole point here is making sure you see clearly. Yep. And so, I don't want to go in for a open heart surgery and meet my surgeon and he's blind. Yeah. I'd be like, okay,
there's no braille on
that's
this
gonna
body.
be, I mean, like, that's gonna be really, really tough for me to trust this guy in the operation room, even though I'm going to be out of it. I'd be like, I don't know if I'm going in there. I might just leave and go find another hospital or something. And that's kind of what Jesus is saying is, before you help somebody else with what's wrong in their life, make sure you can see clearly, which means get those, things that are obstructing your view out of your eye, and then help your brother with it. So it's kind of, think first about what's going on in here in your heart, how your life is. And not that we have to be perfect by any means. It's just that that's the level of humility we want to approach things with.
I think there's another element to that too. When we think judgment, we think like harsh criticism. We think judgment of like, how dare you, you're wrong, you did this. And so like, in a sense, you shouldn't be judging out of a stance of you are terrible.
Right.
What instead, when we're talking about calling out sin, it's not looking down on the person and saying, how dare you do this? Like, you are terrible. It's instead meant to be in a loving manner, a building up manner. Judging is declaring someone as wrong and cast out. And
Like,
when we
because of that, you're doomed.
you're done.
You're
out. You're hosed.
You're dead to me.
Yeah.
Something people say.
And that's not the case when it comes to sin. We're not called to look at someone who's in sin, whether it be something small like a little, they just have a lying problem, which can be annoying, but
right.
They're not out there killing people, which is also sinful, or anything in that spectrum. We look at sin as spectrum. God looks at sin as sin, but anywhere in that, however we see it, we're not called to look at them and cast that judgment of, man, they are dead to me. They are done. God can't save them. It's over for them. Instead, we're meant to look at them and be like, hey, you're missing the mark, but Jesus still loves you. You're missing the mark, but he died on that cross for you. And so you can turn from it and come back to him. You can go to him for the first time or the 100th time if you're still struggling with that sin, and he's there for you. It's the heart posture behind it.
I mean, the whole goal is to get the person, whoever's sinning, whoever's struggling, is to get them to Jesus.
Yeah.
It's not to get them to obey the commands more frequently or to have a better life or it's always get the person to Jesus, because that's what Matthew 7 is all about, is that we've got a log of sin in our eye, and Jesus does not expect us to be able to pluck that on our own. Like, he is the one that does that. He did that on the cross, and he does that through his Holy Spirit, through sanctification. And so the goal is we go to Jesus. He helps us. We go to him for forgiveness, for grace, for the strength to obey and to do what is right and to have our hearts right as well. Because, I mean, heck, we can't get our hearts right. And then after that, we help the other people and say, hey, let's go to Jesus together. Because the whole goal is not getting them to obey better and to be a better person. The goal is to get them to Jesus.
The goal is to get them back.
Right.
To bring them back into fellowship.
Right.
And so when we read that passage, like, yes, we shouldn't be judging. We're not judging for the sense of destroying someone. We are confronting with the goal of bringing back fellowship.
Right.
Of coming back together, having that unity, that connection back. And so that leads us to a passage in Matthew as well. Matthew.
Perfect timing.
Look at you.
Perfect timing for me to be on the podcast.
But that leads to a passage in Matthew. It's Matthew chapter 18. It's what really, to me, sparked this whole idea of, if we are talking about their sin and we're calling out sin, it's what in my mind sparks this. So I just want to read it. And it's Matthew chapter 18. It starts in verse 15. And listen to what he said. He said, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you've gained your brother. But if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. For truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again, I say to you, if 2 of you agree on earth about anything, they ask it and it will be done. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, then I am among them. And then I love what it says in verses 21 and 22. Peter, hearing this idea about forgiving sins and bringing back fellowship, Peter said in verse 21, he came up and said to him, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Peter's looking at Jesus like, if he's sinning and I'm calling him out and he sins and I call him out and he repents, but he does it again and he repents, how often do I have to deal with this guy?
Peter's probably thinking like a big number.
Peter's
like 1's a lot, 2's too many, and
7.
3's a crowd. So how about 7?
7's a big number.
Yeah.
And then Jesus in verse 22 said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. In essence, Jesus is looking at Peter and saying, every time. And so when we hear this idea of calling out sin, I love the principle that Matthew lays out right here, that Jesus laid out, that Matthew wrote. Because essentially what he's saying is, if there is sin, if there's someone you know that is sinning, that is doing wrong, then go to that person. Don't go to other people. Don't go to your best friend. Don't go to your mom or your grandma and talk about how this guy is doing all the wrong things. go to that person and talk to him about it. He said, if your brother sins, go tell him his fault between you and him alone.
Right.
He said, go to him, talk about it. He said, if he doesn't listen, then bring a couple more and go to him. And it's not random people. It's the idea of bring people that are close to him.
Right. And people that would know, like,
and people that
may know about this situation too,
Yeah.
because, he says we're trying to get witnesses is the word, we're wanting to get people there who have seen this so that it's not, he said, she said, my word versus your word, but instead it's, hey, we've got some proof here. Let's talk about this.
Yeah. And so he's saying, hey, do that. And then he's like, if he doesn't listen, hey, bring it up to everybody. Mm-hmm. Bring it up to, I like that it said the church.
Right.
It didn't say every person everywhere, but the church has this idea of community fellowship. We're studying the book of Acts right now. And It's the church. And we're seeing that the early church had all things together in common. That the one thread that was constantly being fought for, attacked, and striving to continue was the idea of unity. That they were together. They ate together. They read together. They studied together. They sold land to pay bills for other people in the church because they were together. It was their community. So he's saying, if they're not listening with a few close friends, a few close people that know about it, then they're saying, hey, bring it up to the community and let them know it. And so I actually have a story about this.
Oh, do you?
I do.
Okay.
And
let's hope it ends well.
In the moment, I didn't realize that I was applying this principle. So that's cool, actually.
But you did.
But we did.
Okay.
It actually ended up. So I had a friend. So I went to college. Spoiler alert. And
after you were ripping out Greek and Hebrew words, I don't think anybody was doubting that. They're like, man, this guy.
So I went to college.
Hat backwards scholar.
Back in the day, it was called Piedmont Bible College. They then got an upgrade to Piedmont Baptist College. It got the nickname of Piedmont Bridal College because that's where you went to go find your bride.
Oh, that's bad.
When I showed up, that was a terrible nickname. It still had that nickname around campus even today as the Piedmont Bridal College. Listen, you get your ring by spring.
Yep.
Amen.
Yep.
But when I went there, it started to go by the name of Piedmont International University. They become a university. They were big time.
International too.
International. Yeah. And so I showed up at PIU and I was a sophomore. And I had a buddy. I'm not going to share his name because I don't know if he'll see this. If you see this, then hey,
shout out.
Welcome.
You made
shout
it.
Shout out. You made it. But I had a buddy who we were really tight. I'm saying like every single day for every single hour of every day we were together. We had the same classes. We were talking about the same goals, ambitions, what we wanted. This was the guy that like, he would come up to me and he was so sensitive to the spirit where he would be like, man, we need to just go walk around downtown Winston today and just bring our Bibles and just pray for people. And I was like, I just wanted to play ping pong today.
Yeah.
But all right, let's go do it. And so we were doing all this. We were super tight. Well, we left after our freshman year of college, went back home. I started working at a summer camp. He got an internship at a camp. And so he's working, I'm working. We come back and he starts telling me how he ってgirlfriend.
Like, ring by spring.
Amen.
The bridal college.
I was like, I got a girlfriend too. Like, let's go.
Yeah.
My girlfriend was a senior in high school. So, we're married now. Only 1 year age gap. 1.5.
But at that time,
it's
it was like college, high school.
I got picked on because she was a senior, and I was like, hey, listen, she'll kick your butt. She's awesome. But we were talking, and he was saying like, yeah, like talking all about this girl. Oh, she's so cool. She's so great. Well, then he tells me, I think a slip of the tongue. He was like, I was inviting him like, hey, let's go like Friday night. Let's go to the Dash game. It was super close. Let's walk to the Dash game. He's like, oh, I can't. I'm busy this weekend. Like, oh, what are you doing? Oh, I'm busy. What are you doing? Like, where are you going? What you doing? So he let me know that his plan was to drive 15 hours because the girl lived in Boston.
Oh, my.
So his plan was Friday after class to drive 15 hours to Boston because her parents weren't home.
I see where this is going.
So then...
hang out and
to Netflix and chill.
Yeah.
And then proceed to leave and come back and be back by the time school started on Monday.
That's a lot of driving.
And so then I'm sitting down and I'm like, do your parents know? Well, your parents aren't going to let you do that. And he was like, no, I told them that I'm going to your house.
Oh, yikes.
I was like, uh-oh. And so then I'm looking and I'm like, okay, so, at the time, our
expecting
RA,
his
we had to
boy to cover
out.
for him.
He's expecting his boy. So I looked at him, I was like, you shouldn't be doing that, man. Like, you want to do this, like, that's not right. And I start like telling him like Bible verses and scripture, like, you shouldn't be doing this. He doesn't listen. He's like, no, I'm doing it. So then I go and I get a couple other of our friends. I had 2 friends that we were all like, it was a group of 4 of us. We were super close.
Intervention time.
We're hanging the banner.
Yep.
Like, you're supposed to stay pure. You talk about you've never done this. You want to give that gift to your wife. She's not your wife, dude. Like, what are you doing? Intervention time. We're talking to him. He doesn't listen. He proceeds to leave, go, do this, come back, talk about it. And then it got around, like, it's a small campus. There's a reason it was called Piedmont Bridal College. There was like 30 of us there. It got around. And so then we all started talking to him and challenging him, like, man, that wasn't right. Like, you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't be doing that again. He's making plans to do it again. And long story short, after years and years, we reconnected outside, and him and her, they didn't stay together because, hey, if you didn't know this, if it's not your wife, it's probably not a good idea. It's definitely not a good idea. It's definitely against the
Thanks
Bible.
for switching the probably to definitely.
Probably to definitely to 100%. It's not what God calls you to. It does not work. It's not meant to be that way. And they broke up, as typical. And he was telling me he got married now, and we were talking, and he actually told me, he's like, man, I should have listened to you.
Yeah.
I knew you were right. I wasn't thinking, all the things. We built some community back and some fellowship back. But that was like a real life example of attempting to call out sin.
I mean, what's so sad about that, though, is not even like, I love, and this is a bad thing. So this is not, this is since we're talking about sin, let's confess real quick. One of my struggles is I told you so moments. I love when I say, don't do X, Y, Z, or you should do X, Y, Z.
And then they
don't listen, and they come back and say, oh, I should have listened to you. Even if it's about like silly things, not even something as serious as that. And I love being able that, like,
Jordan Love
I
was
was,
the GOAT.
oh, here we go. We don't have time for that. Fantasy football season starting up. Don't draft him. He's unproven.
Yeah,
This
mine.
is just me trying to peg Jamie.
Anyways,
I love that, and that's a prideful thing. So I get that. That's not right of me, and I try not to like it, but I struggle with liking that. But the struggle and the sad thing about that is, yes, you were right, but now, like, that breaks my heart to hear that he's going, I messed it up, and now I don't have the blessing on the other side of this. I forfeited something good. It's like, it's full circle back to what we talked about at the beginning. He's forfeiting the opportunity, the blessing that God offered, the abundant, the full life in that area of his life, and he forfeited that with that sin, and I guess that just kind of goes back to everything we stated at the beginning. Like, the whole goal is not Jamie was right. Like, make sure all of YouTube world knows how smart and right Jamie is. It's like no. The whole point is that, like, how heartbreaking it is for that person not to walk in the fullness of life that's promised by Jesus. And we do all the same things all the time we do that. And so that's why confronting sin is so important. It helps remove the heartbreak that people have.
So I want to kind of transition us to the end of this talk. We were talking about confronting sin, where we've talked about why you should do it. We've talked about, the biggest problematic passage you'll hit of people being like, well, you're not supposed to judge me. And you're like, if you're doing it right, you're not judging. You're calling for restoration and the renewal of fellowship. So I'd love to talk for just a little bit of some ways that we can actively, call out sin, or the ways that we can actively start to confess sin or confront sin.
Yeah, kind of first steps of putting Matthew 18 into practice.
Putting Matthew 18 into practice, like some ways. And so the first thing that I thought of, like, when I'm thinking, if I want to help my friend flee sin, the first thing I thought is, man, I need to be praying. I need to make sure that I am praying and seeking Jesus, because I don't want to go up to someone and I don't want it to turn into Jamie was right and you're wrong. I don't want it to turn into you sinned and I knew it and I told you so. I want to make sure that I'm praying that way. I'm seeking, what is the Lord saying? How can I handle this in a correct manner? How can I talk to this person about that? Like, praying for guidance, praying for the wisdom, the words to say it.
Right.
It almost sounds cliche to say that when we're praying it, but it's genuine of like, Lord, I don't know how to talk about this topic. Like my buddy is struggling with the videos he's watching on the internet. I don't know how to bring that up to him. And so it's the prayer of, Lord, show me what to do. And so I think if we want to, confront sin, I think we need to be praying about it, praying about, the situation, how we can say it, what words can we use, praying that they would be open to hearing it.
Yeah.
Because I think, prayer as a believer should be what is the mark of everything we do. I think, Paul talks about pray without ceasing. Everything, every moment we should be seeking God. And so I think the first thing is just we should be praying.
Yeah. And especially to open up our own heart to understand, like we talked about at the beginning, making sure that we're right, that we've got our hearts right.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to have the realization, oh, I've got a log coming out of my eye.
Yeah, exactly.
And the whole point, Matthew 7 is, well, you can't see right. You've got a log sticking out, and what you're focused on is a speck in somebody else's eye. And so we need to get Jesus's help to see our own lives. And so, prayer, right? And that helps us be humble, which is one of the things I was going to point out is approaching that person with a spirit of humility, not like you and I have said a couple times, not the I'm right spirit, not the I want to be right spirit, not the I want to call you out because you're kind of acting like you're all that and I want to knock you down a few notches. Like none of that. It's I'm coming with that humble spirit.
Yeah. I think that's a key is being humble. No one wants to listen to you if you're coming with a prideful heart.
Right.
If you're coming and you're like, I'm so much better than you, and let me tell you why, because you're doing this. Nobody's going to listen to that. And so you're coming with some humility. You're coming with the facts of like, man, like we're trying to seek Jesus. Like, we know. And I think that humility will go a long way just in everything in life, not just calling out sin, but just as a whole, if our life can be something that is striving for humility, I think that'll be great. But here's another thing I thought of when we're talking about confronting sin. Don't be afraid. I think a lot of times we as believers are terrified to look at someone and tell them that they're sinning.
Probably because of Matthew 7.
Because of Matthew 7. We're terrified to look at someone and say, you're doing something wrong. You're going against God. We're terrified of that. And I would challenge you, if you know people that are struggling with sin, don't be afraid to point it out. Do it in love, do it in truth, come with humility, be prayed up, but don't be afraid of it because we know what God's calling us to. We know that we are called to be holy. We know that we are called to be good. We know that God is laying out a life for us and that he's working all things out, Romans 8:28, for our good. We know all of this. We know the truth. And we also know that sin is missing the mark.
Right.
Sin is missing what God is pulling us for. And so don't be afraid to look at someone and call them out on it.
Yeah. I mean, and that starts with the humility and the prayer aspect is realizing like, hey, God's glory is at stake here. So it's not even about me making sure your life is right or making sure that I'm right. It's about God's glory being at stake as his people are either obeying or disobeying. And so, when you kind of come from that vantage point, it helps with that too. And then the last thing that we had noted was coming from that standpoint of, it's not about me being right. And so therefore my goal is not to prove me right, but to get you to Jesus and offer them grace. Yeah. And so come in with that loving heart of, I want to point this out and call this out because I want to bring you to Jesus. I love a verse in, I think it's 2 Timothy. It's either 1st or 2 Timothy where Paul tells the young guy, Timothy, flee youthful passions, but pursue. And then so he's like, so run away from this, run away from sin. But then he says, run to, and he says things like righteousness, stuff that only Jesus can offer. So what he's saying is run away from sin, but run to Jesus as the point of, we're never just running from something, but we're always running to someone. Exactly. We're trying to get to Christ. And so as people, calling out, confronting sin, the goal is offer them grace. Give them the grace that Jesus offered you and I and everyone else first, and then offer to somebody else.
Yeah, I like that. I think if you're actively seeking to, help people move, because we say calling out sin or confronting sin, but it's not a sharp thing. It's a loving thing. If you're actively wanting to help your brother or sister in Christ come back, we need to be prayed up. We need to be actively praying. We need to be humble. Don't be afraid to do it because you're seeking their good. And then we need to offer that grace. We need to be willing. Like Jesus said to Peter, how many times should I offer them grace? Well, as many times as they sin, 70 times 7 or 77 times, as many times.
Yep.
Because in the end, that's what Jesus does for us.
Yep.
When we sin, Jesus doesn't look and say, all right, that was your 5th time. You got 2 more.
Yeah.
All right, that was your 6th time. You're really using them all in one day? No, Jesus, every time we sin, it says that his grace abounds. And so we need to be doing the same. And so I think, hey, if you got friends that are struggling, if you yourself is struggling, I would encourage you with this. 1 John talks about how if we say that we have no sin, we make God a liar because we all have sinned. And he said, but if we confess our sin, 1 John 1:9, if we confess our sin, he's faithful and just to forgive us of our sin and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. So if you are struggling with sin, I would challenge you to confess it to Jesus, to go to him. If you have friends or family that are struggling with sin, I would challenge you to go and talk to them about it. Not in a spirit of I told you so, not in a spirit of I'm greater than you, but in the spirit of, hey, I see you're struggling and I want to help you come back to Jesus. Yep. And so, man, this has been the REVO Church podcast. This has been the first episode in the series where we are diving into some hard passages. I'm so glad that you joined us today. We'll see you next time.